If a war breaks out between two countries, there will be a whole new level of adrenaline rush. A lot of curiosity will be there among media, newspapers, people around the world. But people who go through it are the real sufferers. They know the amount of trauma, tragedy, and loss. And no country wants to engage in war. A war will pull you several years back in terms of progress. You will face economic sanctions, isolations. But what made Vladimir Putin to take such an extreme step to announce a military operation in Ukraine? If you see the conditions that Russia put up for it not to go for a war, it was not directed towards Ukraine. It was in fact directed towards US and NATO. Then why did Russia strike on Ukraine? In this whole episode, Ukraine was only the scapegoat. A few decades back, when Ukraine used to be part of Russia, Russia used to be USSR. When USSR was divided in the year 1991, several small countries were formed and Ukraine was part of it. Ukraine is one of the countries that formed in 1991. And Ukraine's separation from Russia was quite a painful episode for Russia, but these two countries shared a very good relationship. In fact, in 1996, when NPT was signed, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, Ukraine gave all its nuclear bombs to Russia. 30% of Ukraine's population is pro-Russia. So they speak Russian language, they support Russian ambitions. So there are two parts. One is Eastern Ukraine, another is Western Ukraine. So majority of the Eastern Ukrainians are supporters of Russia. And Eastern Ukraine shares border with Russia as well. So whereas the Western Ukraine, they are native Ukrainians. They are anti-Russian, they are against Russian policies. And they quite often raise voices against pro-Russian policies. The relationship between Russia and Ukraine was very good before 2014 because the Ukrainian government was a puppet of Russia. The policies and programs are pretty much decided by Russia. And US and Europe never showed any guts to interfere in the region. Then what happened after 2014? That Russia started losing control over Ukraine and Ukraine started inclining towards Europe. Between 2010 and 2014, this guy Viktor Fedorovich Yanukovych was Ukraine's president and was a pro-Russia face. He was called in for an European Union meeting and was offered a free trade agreement which he outrightly denied. So this caused a massive outrage in Ukraine. People held protest march between 2013 November and 2014 February. As the protests turned violent, President Viktor fled to Russia to save himself. After this, most of the political parties in Ukraine realized that majority of Ukrainians are against pro-Russia policies and started gradually tilting towards Europe. Russia started noting this trend very seriously and suddenly wasn't happy. I'll tell you why. Russia is a very big supplier of natural gas to Europe and 30% of European natural gas requirement is being supplied by Russia. This natural gas supply happens through pipelines and the countries through which the pipelines go are being paid certain rents. After 2014 fallout, Ukraine started demanding massive $33 billion from Russia because Russian pipelines were going through Ukraine's territory. Then Russia wanted Ukraine to join Eurasian trade agreement. Ukraine denied that as well. That was still fine. But Russia got really serious when Ukraine started showing interest to join NATO. NATO is North Atlantic Treaty Organization formed in 1949 after Second World War, which was basically a few countries got together to sign a treaty and arrived at an understanding that attack on one is considered to be an attack on all. They carry out combined military drills, plant missiles, conduct war games, etc. But this was basically created to counter USSR so that it doesn't attack small nations. It was only 11 countries when it was formed. Today it's a 30-nation strong front. And Russia didn't really care when NATO was expanding its horizon on the western side of Europe. But as US started shifting its focus on Eastern Europe, that is where the problem started for Russia. Because the anti-Russian front was growing and steadily US military and missiles were reaching on the Russian border. Recently, Joe Biden also gave a statement saying that they are concerned about the security and safety of small nations and they are going to deploy troops on Eastern Europe. But if they would have really cared about small nations, they wouldn't have vacated Afghanistan overnight. I'll tell you why this is so serious concern for Russia. US's strategic military assets were placed targeting Russia. Countries that were friendly with Russia were provoked by US to take anti-Russian stand. Ukraine becoming NATO member exposed entire 2,300 Russian border to NATO allies. Russia has been telling US that we are not coming anywhere near you. Why are you coming near our borders? Russian military started surrounding Ukraine and preparing for an attack. But before any action, Russia put forward these three demands in front of US and NATO. Now you know this clearly that Ukraine was just a scapegoat. The first demand was Russia wanted NATO to stop all its military activities done in Eastern Europe and take out all its NATO forces from Poland and Baltic nations. Second, Ukraine to never be a member of NATO. And the third was US to disarm all its nuclear missiles in Europe. If you see all these three demands, none of them were demanded from Ukraine. All of them were demanded from US and NATO. It is historically proven that US gives false security assurance to small countries, and when they are in real danger, real trouble, it runs away. In this whole situation, if you carefully see, US is making friendly neighboring countries fight without firing a single bullet. Ukrainians are also fighting hard and inflicting heavy damage on Russia. Now the world should bring US also to the table and make them responsible for provoking Russia. US is continuously pressurizing India also to take a stand against Russia. But India is not a small puppet nation to jeopardize its own interest by acting according to US. And Ukrainian leaders didn't understand this game plan by US and its allies, and now have to pay heavy price for it by losing lots of lives, damage to the nation. Whole nation is suffering. And India will never take a stand against Russia at this point in time, because India is very well aware that Pakistan and China are waiting to capitalize such situation. And when India needed Ukraine's support at the time of nuclear testing, Kashmir issue, a permanent membership at United Nations Security Council, and at a time when US was supplying weapons to Pakistan, in all these situations, Ukraine opposed India. It could be their interest at that time, but taking a neutral stand is India's best interest today. All the countries should be prepared themselves to defend against external aggressions.